Hello and welcome to this Creston International Audit webinar on demand. This is the first Creston International webinar on demand, and these webinars are designed either to be used for personal self-study or can be used as part of a group CPD session within individual member firms. Over the course of the coming year, we'll be releasing a number of Creston webinars on demand, covering areas relating both to audit and international financial reporting standards. This first webinar looks at an audit quality update, reflecting on issues identified during 2019 and giving a preview of matters that will come up during 2020. During the course of this webinar, we will cover 6 areas. We will look at the review cycle, how quality can be managed outside the audit area within firms, the outcome from some quality reviews, follow-up procedures for audit quality, what is happening in terms of the audit quality and quality agenda generally, and how firms can manage quality successfully. So we will start by looking at the review cycle. And this is a picture of what's called the wall of death. And the secret for the wall of death and why that man looks so relaxed is that he knows, providing he keeps going and keeps the power on, he will stay at the top of the wall. If he takes his eye off the ball and slows down, then he will drift down the wall, and in fact if he stops completely he will fall off. And that is much the same with audit quality. It is something that requires a continual review and input and attention, and that will ensure that quality continues to be a focus for teams during their work, and that the firm has more opportunity to ensure that it is delivering quality work to its clients. So if we look at the review cycle within Creston International, the first point to bear in mind is that internal monitoring is the responsibility of individual member firms. Firms are required, in accordance with ISQC1, that's the International Standard on Quality Control, to have an ongoing cyclical review of completed files. The normal expectation is that at least one file will be reviewed for each partner over a 3-year period. Many firms review the work of each partner each year, or they will have different review cycles depending on the risk and the type of assignments carried out by partners. So for example, partners carrying out listed work will be subject to review on an annual basis, whereas other partners may be reviewed on a cyclical basis. The internal monitoring review also needs to look at the overall systems of quality within the firm to ensure that these are up to date and relevant and continue to address the risks faced by the firm in delivering its professional services. I say, it is important to remember this is the responsibility of individual member firms. This is not something that is covered by Creston International reviews or by reviews from external monitoring bodies. However, many firms will choose for their internal monitoring to engage the services of specialists in this area, such as a training organisation or other reviewers that work independently from the firm. Why will they do this? This is to ensure that the review has appropriate levels of objectivity and that the reviewer can focus on the monitoring review rather than being distracted by day-to-day client issues and managing the firm. So it's acceptable to outsource the internal monitoring to an appropriately qualified company or individual, but it should be remembered that the firm retains the responsibility for managing that process and ensuring that the files selected for review are appropriate and that appropriate follow-up action is undertaken. In terms of Creston International reviews, these are undertaken for the purposes of managing the network, ensuring that our member firms have appropriate quality procedures in place, and that the obligations of being a Creston International member are being followed. We also have an obligation to report to the Forum of Firms on an annual basis that we do have a centrally controlled and undertaken international review cycle for our member firms. So again, these reviews are carried out on a cyclical basis. The starting point is that the firms will be reviewed every 3 years, but these reviews again are risk-based, so the periods can be longer. So a firm will be reviewed at a longer period if, for example, it is not undertaking transnational audit work or group audit work where it is relying on the work of other auditors, or preparing audits for components of international groups where other auditors are relying on that work. And just to emphasise again, the Creston review cannot be used to substitute for the internal review. It should also be remembered that internal monitoring is an important part of actually delivering our professional services. This is the key area where we generate revenue from clients, and therefore, in common with many businesses, it is only sensible to actually review the quality of that work to ensure it's being delivered in an effective and efficient manner to safeguard the ongoing income stream that is generated from audit work. So it shouldn't just be seen as a compliance requirement, but as an opportunity, as I say, to assess how the work that's being provided to clients is being undertaken. Now, I like to think that audit is the engine room of many professional firms. It's what drives the firm forward. But then we have around that many other professional services of various types that we provide to clients. Tax services, accounting outsourcing, payroll, information technology, all sorts of services that can be provided to clients. And how do we manage and assess the quality outside the audit sphere where there are not as many standards and guidance requirements that we need to follow? Is it something that we should be looking at? As I mentioned, there are lots of areas where we can be providing services: tax, corporate finance, cyber security, for example. And how do we assess quality there? Well, the key is to apply the principles of ISQC1. And these break down into 6 areas. First one is leadership. Are these service lines led by the appropriate people with the appropriate authority and resources to ensure that they are delivering quality? Does that leadership team monitor the quality of the work that's being performed? Are we satisfied that the ethical requirements relating to those service lines are being followed? The IASPA code contains a number of restrictions on the types of services, for example, that can be provided to audit clients. And it's important that our service lines outside audit are aware of those and have procedures in place to ensure that the services they provide are within the ethical guidelines and the independence requirements for firms of accountants. Client acceptance. This ensures that the clients that we take on are appropriate for our firm, that we have the right skills, that we understand the risk of the service that's being provided, that the resources that will be generated by the client in terms of the fees are able to cover the costs of the service that is being provided, and that the client actually will be able to pay those fees. So a good client acceptance procedure will again at the outset ensure that the firm is in a position to deliver a quality service. Human resources, again, that's do we have the right people with the right skills in the right place to perform the work for these non-audit service lines. In terms of engagement performance, it can be quite difficult to monitor the quality of that in terms of the technical aspects because it requires often very specialist knowledge. For example, international tax planning or cybersecurity services, corporate finance services. These are specialist services where it is very difficult sometimes to make an assessment of the quality of the work that's being undertaken from a technical perspective. However, we can make sure that normal quality procedures are in place. So, for example, our reports on high risk complex areas being reviewed by a second partner or somebody else within the team before they're issued to the client. Are there appropriate review procedures in place before advice is given? Are documents being stored securely and in a manner which will enable them to be accessed if required at a later stage? Does the service that's being provided agree to the engagement letter and the terms of reference that have been agreed with the client at the outset? A number of these areas do not require specialist knowledge of the technical area being provided, but ensure that the process is being managed effectively. And then does the service line monitor its activity? Does it stand back and look at some completed assignments to ensure that they have followed their internal procedures in terms of acceptance and performance of the engagement, and where possible that the technical quality of the engagement meets any requirements. So it is possible to review quality outside the audit sphere. How about quality review outcomes? Well, when we prepare a report for a Crescent International review, we look at 5 individual areas. The first of which is ISQC1, the International Standard on Quality Control. Does the firm have in place appropriate procedures to ensure that it complies with these requirements, and have those been assessed as part of its own internal monitoring procedures? We will then look at the ethical standards issued by IESBA, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, to ensure that in the work performed, the firm monitors and follows and considers the ethical standards in accepting a client. In particular, we will look at how it follows the requirements for networks and non-audit services that are being provided to an audit or assurance client. Has that been properly documented, and are safeguards in place and operational where required for non-audit services? The expectation as a Crescent member firm is that the firm will be able to do an ISA compliant audit where required, and therefore we will look at the systems and procedures in place to ensure that they do comply with the ISAs. This will often involve as well then looking at individual files, and we will assess the performance on individual files against the requirements of ISAs and the ethical standards. And finally, as part of a quality review for Crescent, we will look at Crescent membership requirements. Principally, that will revolve around disclosure of Crescent International membership and areas such as professional indemnity insurance. Our findings when we carry out these reviews are split into 3 levels. Those are significant findings where perhaps, for example, the firm is not currently complying with one of the requirements of ISQC1, and these need to be addressed by the firm as a matter of urgency. Other findings where, for example, compliance with certain requirements could be improved in terms of the timeliness perhaps or documentation. And then other recommendations. These are areas where we would share good practice from other firms that the firms could consider adopting for their own purposes. So when we look at the quality review outcomes overall, we'll have a spectrum of outcomes, and this is changing for 2020. This is a new scale that we've introduced rather than the pass-fail scale that was in place previously. So the firm could be at top level satisfactory. That's where the firm meets the expected standards in all material respects. Satisfactory with some improvements required. So there may be some significant findings under a couple of the headings and some issues to address, but generally the firm has good quality processes and systems in place which are followed in their day-to-day work. And then at the other end, an unsatisfactory with significant improvement required. This is where a firm has a high number of significant issues or a number of issues across a number of the 5 headings which it needs to address in order to improve the quality and ensure that it complies with the expectations of Craftsman International and ISQC1. So hopefully we will not have many findings in that bottom category. How do we follow up on quality reviews? Well, following completion of the assignment, the firm is required to prepare an action plan. This simply sets out how it will propose to address issues identified by the review and has in place a suitable timetable and resources to address any issues identified. If we do get into situations where a firm is seen as being in an unsatisfactory position, then there can be scope for a follow-up review within 12 months. That will be at the cost of the firm. And we're trying to set a bar at the appropriate height here. We're not setting a bar that's so high that hardly any firms can pass it, but we need to set a bar that's the right height to make sure that firms are delivering quality services to their clients. So as I say, we'll be following up on action plans as we already do, making sure those are being implemented, and if required, carrying out further follow-up reviews with firms. So if we look now at the quality agenda, we can have a look and see what the standard setters and regulators are looking at and where they're active. And these reflect in many senses the type of findings that we would see on the Crescent International reviews. The IAASB has been active in a number of areas recently, and this is mainly in response to criticisms from regulators and regular findings from regulators in terms of their own quality reviews. So you may have seen that recently a revised ISA 315 on risk assessment has been issued. This is how auditors plan the audit, making sure that the risk areas are addressed within that audit. And it has been seen that auditors could improve in this area to make sure that their audits are more focused and appropriate effort is being made in the higher risk areas of the audit. So this standard has just been issued, and later in this year some of these webinars will cover the changed requirements of ISA 315. We've also been looking at engagement quality reviews. So an engagement quality review is required where the client is, for example, a public interest entity. This is a second partner review before the audit opinion is followed. Criticisms from regulators have revolved around the timing of those reviews and the fact that many engagement quality reviews do not identify significant or potentially significant deficiencies in the conduct of audit work, which are later identified by external regulatory reviews or the firm's own internal quality reviews. And therefore it's looking to re-emphasise the importance of these reviews, the qualifications and experience of the people that are carrying out these reviews, and the timing of those reviews, and indeed the resources and time that is allocated to carry out those reviews, to ensure that they really do act as a safeguard to ensure that appropriate reports are issued on those assignments. Group audits has been an issue for some time, and ISA 600 is now being revisited. This work will be carried out over this year, so we may see a new exposure draft towards the end of the year. And this again is basically making sure and looking at situations where there are perhaps many subsidiaries on a global basis, and making sure that the group auditor takes responsibility for the group audit and directing us and assisting the work that's carried out by those component auditors to make sure that sufficient audit evidence is gathered across the whole of the group. So I say there will be some changes potentially to ISA 600. And again, another area that has been highlighted by regulators as not being addressed as well as it could do in all cases. The final area that the IAASB have looked at is auditing accounting estimates under ISA 540. And again, a revised ISA 540 was issued just towards the end of 2019. And again, we will have some webinars later this year looking at ISA 540, the new requirements, and how that may impact on our audit work going forward. And then some local regulators have also been looking at some areas, and in the UK FRC, which is the external regulator in the UK, has in particular been looking at going concern and ISA 570. In the UK, we have had a number of significant corporate failings in recent years, where going concern has been seen as an issue, and the auditors have been perhaps criticised for the work that they have done in the area of going concern and how that has been reported in financial statements. Examples include BHS, British Home Stores, which is a large retailer, Carillion, which was a service provider undertaking many government contracts, and a construction company, which again got into going concern situation where it was unable to fund its liabilities and went into liquidation and put many jobs at risk. And more recently, the travel company Thomas Cook, which again got into financial difficulties and led to a significant number, hundreds of thousands of holidaymakers having to be repatriated to the UK from overseas. So there's been a real focus in the UK. So say this is amendments to the standard as it applies in the UK, but it can give useful guidance where you have a going concern issue potentially on a client to the type of work that an auditor should be undertaking to assess and report on going concern issues. It's important to remember always that going concern is a responsibility of the directors of the company, and it's important therefore to make sure that you're talking to your clients early, especially where going concern may be an issue, to ensure that they're taking appropriate steps to prepare forecasts, to talk to financiers in advance of the year end to ensure that going concern has been properly addressed. And then finally in the US, the PCAOB again are looking at accounting estimates under US standards, and again expect some changes there, as well as the use of experts within the audit and how they are managed, and the independence and scope of their work is assessed. So as I say, a number of areas there to be aware of as you look to carry out your audits, areas of focus for regulators and standard setters. And overlying all of those areas is a concern among regulators about the application of professional scepticism by the auditor, the challenging mindset that the auditor is required to have when it's talking to management to assess the quality of audit evidence and to ensure that appropriate audit evidence is gathered to support assertions within the audit. And you will see this coming through in all standards and communications in the coming year. So professional skepticism is important. Think about how your teams demonstrate and apply professional skepticism in the work that they are carrying out. And finally, let's look at managing quality. Tone at the top is seen as one of the key drivers in terms of delivering quality performance. Are all your partners delivering their services in the same way, complying with the firm's requirements, ensuring that quality is reinforced within their teams? Tone at the top will certainly be reinforced by the new quality management standards that are expected later this year, with a real focus on the work of the senior leadership of the firm. Indeed, many of the external regulators are starting to shift the focus of their reviews away from looking at files in great detail, although that still will happen, to focus much more on the management of quality and the responsibilities and actions taken by the senior leadership of the firm, and placing far much greater responsibility on those leaders to deliver quality. As I said at the beginning, it is an area that requires regular focus and regular reinforcement. It is easy, as time passes, to drift away from those key areas, those important areas that have been part of the focus of audit quality. Teams get distracted by the demands of clients, the pressures of timeliness, of completion of work, other requirements from within the firm, and therefore it's important that quality is reinforced on a regular basis to ensure that it is at the forefront of the team's mind as they undertake audit work. What are those key areas that you need your teams to be focusing on in terms of the delivery of audit work to ensure a quality product? In terms of your internal monitoring quality processes, are those adequately resourced? Do you have significant enough resource? Do you need to outsource to get additional objective reviewers in place to enable a quality review program to be undertaken successfully? Are those reviewers that you are using suitably qualified and experienced? Do they have the right level of seniority to be able to have perhaps difficult conversations with audit partners regarding the quality of the audit work that has been undertaken? When you report on audit quality, does that go to the right people within the firm? Is it being considered by the senior management team, the management committee, or the board of directors of the firm to ensure that appropriate actions are being taken and that the right resources are in place? And finally, a lot of time and effort is put into undertaking reviews, to looking at the review results, perhaps undertaking training with teams to ensure they understand the requirements. But it's also important that the progress is then monitored after that to ensure that the files and the processes and procedures that are being put in place as a response to quality monitoring actually are reflected in the files that are produced on a day-to-day basis. That might, for example, require some limited, focused reviews of specific areas of a sample of files to ensure, for example, that new going concern procedures are being followed appropriately. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. But I would encourage you to take some time to consider, perhaps as a team, of how are we managing quality? What are the key areas that are coming out of our local regulators' reports that we need to perhaps be aware of and focusing on within our audit work? Are there other areas of our practice outside audit where we need to be looking at the quality of work and how that's delivered to ensure that we're delivering a quality service to our clients? There is paperwork and systems and processes available on the Creston website, click at the moment, that you can access to assist with this area. or please contact me if you need any guidance or have any questions around quality monitoring. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed this webinar and that you will sign up for future webinars as well.